Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this comforting expectation of precision. Like it feels kind of like engineering.
Right.
If you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the black background, and the doctor just points at it, broken or not broken.
It's totally binary. I mean, we inherently crave that kind of visual confirmation. We want to categorize our reality neatly.
Yeah, exactly. But then you step into something like, say, neurodevelopment or complex trauma, and suddenly that x-ray machine is entirely useless. You're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky.
You lose that clean, binary picture of reality completely.
And that exact feeling of disorientation, that loss of a simple grid to place your life onto, is where we are starting our deep dive today. So welcome everyone to a brand new deep dive into some truly mind-bending source material.
And we really are dealing with a massive stack of sources today. We're pulling from these dense philosophical essays. We have transcripts from a literal high-level cage match debate between world-renowned evolutionary biologists and, heavyweight theologians.
Right. Plus, we're looking at ancient Eastern manuscripts, and we're anchoring all of it with an extensive, sweeping theological treatise titled A Theology of Love, Life, and Light.
Now, to be absolutely clear right at the top, our job here today isn't to endorse any of these secular or theological viewpoints.
Definitely.
We aren't taking sides in this debate. Our goal is to objectively and impartially map out the arguments exactly as they're presented in these texts. We just want to synthesize this massive amount of information so that you, the listener, can navigate these concepts for yourself. Because our mission today is to tackle what might be, the ultimate vertigo-inducing question of human existence.
The big one.
Yeah. It's a kind of question that, if you dwell on it for more than 10 seconds, makes the floor feel like it's dropping out from under you. And the question is simply this: why is there something rather than nothing?
That is the foundational question of ontology, which is the philosophical study of being. It's the inquiry into why existence itself is even a category. Right. And to unpack it, we're going to explore two radically different frameworks from our sources. On one side, we have this bottom-up, secular materialist view of reality. And on the other side, we have a top-down ontological framework built entirely on those three concepts from the treatise: love, life, and light.
Let's actually start by addressing that sense of vertigo you mentioned.
Yeah.
Because the German philosopher Schelling had a brilliant term for it. He called it primal astonishment.
Oh, primal astonishment. I really love that phrasing.
Yeah, it captures a very specific psychological moment. It's that sudden, jarring realization that nothingness should logically be the default setting of the universe.
Sure.
A blank void is easy. A blank void requires absolutely no explanation, no physics, no energy, no mechanics.
Yeah.
The fact that anything, a star, a coffee cup, a single atom is here at all is, statistically speaking, the ultimate anomaly.
And yet, whether you're staring at a massive spreadsheet at work right now or you're just sitting in traffic gripping the steering wheel, we completely ignore the fact that the asphalt we're driving on is a cosmic miracle.
Right. We just drink our morning coffee and complain about the weather.
Exactly. But today, we're leaning right into that primal astonishment. And our source material begins this exploration by giving us the bottom-up view, heavily championed in the debate transcripts by the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins.
Dawkins is essentially serving as the premier voice for the secular materialist perspective in these texts. And his fundamental argument is that you can completely, comprehensively explain the staggeringly complex reality we live in by starting with primeval simplicity.
Right.
You don't need a top-down mind, you just need a mechanism, and you need an almost unfathomable amount of time.
What I found really compelling about how Dawkins sets up his argument is that he doesn't try to, downplay the complexity of the world to make his theory easier to swallow.
No, not at all.
He actually leans into the jaw-dropping absurdity of biological complexity. He uses the human brain as his primary exhibit. And the statistics he throws out in the text, my mind was legitimately struggling to comprehend its own hardware. He points out that the human brain has roughly 86 billion neurons.
Which, to put that in perspective, is roughly comparable to the number of stars in the entire Milky Way galaxy, contained inside your skull.
Yeah. But the stars are just the physical building blocks. The connections, the synapses between those 86 billion neurons number around 600 trillion.
It's wild.
And the way he describes the nerve impulses firing across that staggering web is highly visceral. He calls them rifle bullets.
Right. It evokes this high-speed kinetic data transmission. It's not a slow, passive network. It's a hyperactive, microscopic war zone of information.
He estimates that there are 4 quadrillion of these rifle bullet impulses firing per second. 4 quadrillion, every single second you're alive, just to process the light hitting your retinas and the sound of this conversation.
Yeah.
And Dawkins brings up these staggering numbers to actually validate human intuition. He says, look, when a human being looks at a biological machine that processes 4 quadrillion operations a second, our natural, immediate intuition screams that this thing must have been designed. He's validating the friction the listener might feel. He acknowledges that recognizing design is our default cognitive posture.
Okay, let's unpack this intuition thing.
Yeah.
Because if I'm walking through the Mojave Desert and I trip over a metallic object buried in the sand and I dig it up and it's a functioning supercomputer, my intuition absolutely screams design.
Of course.
I do not look at a microchip and think, wow, the wind and the sand really piled up in a remarkably lucky way over the last 2 billion years. I immediately start looking for the engineer who dropped it.
That's the teleological instinct. We look for the telos, the purpose or the creator behind the complex object. And Dawkins uses visual examples from biology to push this intuition even further than the brain.
Right.
He discusses the stick insect, which has evolved to look exactly like a twig, complete with little ridges that mimic leaf scars.
The example from the text that really broke my brain was the leaf insect. The source describes how this insect has these fake rot spots on its wings.
Yeah, it literally mimics fungal decay. It's faking a disease, faking imperfection to achieve perfect camouflage among dead leaves on the forest floor. As a listener, it feels so deeply counterintuitive to look at a fake rot spot on an insect's wing and accept that it's just an illusion of design. It feels like art.
What's fascinating here is that Dawkins fully admits that before Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, the design hypothesis, the idea of a divine architect, was arguably the only rational conclusion a thinking person could reach.
Right. If you saw the leaf insect in 1850, a creator was the most logical deduction.
Exactly. But Darwin provided the mechanism that makes the bottom-up view viable, and Dawkins breaks this down into a relentless 2-step process.
Step 1 is random variation. This is the dice roll. A baby animal is born with a slightly different color pigmentation or slightly longer legs or a tiny mutation in its wing shape. That part is pure, unguided genetic luck.
But step 2 is where the magic happens, and it's entirely unlucky. It's the brutal filter. Non-random survival, natural selection.
Yeah.
The environment ruthlessly and systematically eliminates the variations that do not work. And to explain the extreme artistic precision of something like the fake rod spots, Dawkins introduces the concept of the evolutionary arms race.
Because the environment isn't just the weather, right? The weather doesn't care if you freeze or starve. The environment is primarily other living, hungry things.
That's the core of the arms race. It's a continuous predator versus prey feedback loop. If you have a population of gazelles and a population of cheetahs, the slow gazelles are eaten.
Right, non-random elimination.
Exactly. So the surviving gazelles are, on average, faster, but that creates an immense immediate pressure on the cheetahs. Now, the slow cheetahs starve. So only the absolute fastest cheetahs survive to breed, which in turn forces the next generation of gazelles to get even faster.
It is a 10 million year war of escalation. So when we look at the fake rot spot on the leaf insect, we aren't looking at a painting by a divine artist. We're looking at a microscopic battle scar. It's the result of millions of generations of birds developing slightly sharper eyesight, which forced the insect to develop slightly better camouflage over and over again.
So for Dawkins and the secular materialists in our sources, the mechanism of random variation coupled with non-random survival over deep geological time completely explains the illusion of design. Biology is solved.
You don't need a divine mind.
Right. Staggering complexity can and does climb out of the primeval mud entirely on its own.
I follow the logic. It's an incredibly powerful mechanism. But here's where we hit a massive pivot in the debate transcripts. Because the philosopher Jamie Thornberry enters the conversation, and he throws a massive wrench into Dawkins' conclusion.
He really does.
Thornberry argues that explaining how something works, identifying the mechanism, does not actually explain why it exists in the first place. He's separating the mechanics from the ontology.
Thornberry suggests that Dawkins is making a profound category error. To use a philosophical term, he's confusing the script with the stage.
The analogy Thornberry uses in the text is brilliant. He brings up the Broadway musical Hamilton. He says, imagine you go to a theater to see Hamilton. As long as you understand the plot of the play and the choreography of the dancers, you can explain exactly why the actors are moving around the stage.
Sure.
Alexander Hamilton moves stage left because the script dictates it. Thomas Jefferson walks down the stairs because the choreography demands it. That is the mechanism of the play.
But Thornberry's critique is that explaining the script and the choreography does absolutely nothing to explain who built the theater itself.
Right.
It doesn't explain who hammered the floorboards together. It doesn't explain who wired the lighting rig or who is paying the electric bill to keep those spotlights running.
Evolution is the choreography. It explains how the biological actors move and change. But Thornberry points out that evolution has massive prerequisites. It needs a highly specific stage to already exist before the very first random variation can even occur.
And when we look closely at those prerequisites, the first one is stable laws of chemistry. Evolution fundamentally relies on DNA, which is a complex molecule.
Yeah.
For DNA to exist, it requires carbon atoms to bond with other elements in highly predictable, stable ways. If the laws of chemistry were chaotic-like, if carbon bonded securely on Tuesday but repelled other atoms on Wednesday, you could never build a stable molecule. Evolution would never get off the ground.
You also need mathematical regularity, and crucially, you need a pre-existing information transmission system. The sources emphasize that DNA isn't just a physical ladder, it's a code. It has a syntax.
Think about what an algorithm is. Evolution is basically a biological algorithm of trial and error. But to save the successful trials, to pass on the faster legs to the next generation, you need a hard drive.
Right.
DNA acts as a highly structured language to store that genetic data. Thornberry's critique is that the mechanism of evolution might be able to rearrange the existing letters to write new, complex sentences in the book of life. But evolution absolutely did not invent the alphabet.
I want to make sure I'm grasping the syntax idea. Are the sources saying that randomness might accidentally spill a can of alphabet soup on the floor and the noodles might luckily spell the word CAT?
That's the random variation, yes.
But the randomness can't invent the semantic meaning where the letters CAT conceptually refer to a furry animal that meows. The system of meaning has to precede the accidental spelling.
That is the difference between syntax and semantics, and it is a massive hurdle for purely unguided materialism. And to be fair to the sources, Dawkins actually concedes a version of this in the panel transcript.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he admits that biology might be the flatlands where the mystery of complexity is mostly solved. But he acknowledges that the ultimate mystery hasn't disappeared. It's just retreated downstairs into the basement of reality.
And the basement of reality is the physics cliff.
The physics cliff. This introduces the fine-tuning problem, which is perhaps the most hotly contested real estate in modern cosmology. We're talking about the fundamental constants of the universe, the factory settings of reality.
Things like the exact strength of gravity, or the strong nuclear force that holds atoms together, or the cosmological constant that dictates the exact speed at which the universe is expanding.
Physicists have discovered that these numbers are not just arbitrary, they are set to a razor's edge of precision. If the strength of gravity were turned up just a microscopic fraction of a percent, the early universe would have clumped together far too rapidly and immediately collapsed back in on itself into a massive black hole.
So no stars, no planets, no life.
Exactly. And if you turn the gravity dial down just a microscopic fraction, matter never clumps together at all. Stars never ignite, galaxies never form. You're left with a cold, dark, rapidly expanding soup of useless particles. Again, no life.
The sources use a highly visceral analogy to explain how mathematically absurd this level of precision is. It's called the firing squad analogy.
I love this one.
Okay, picture this. Imagine you are blindfolded and standing in front of a brick wall. 50 of the world's most elite, highly trained military marksmen aim their rifles directly at your chest from 10 feet away. The commander yells fire, and 50 rifles go off at the exact same time.
Right.
The smoke clears, you open your eyes, and somehow every single one of them missed. You're perfectly unharmed.
Now, the secular materialist argument in cosmology is often framed around the anthropic principle. Applied to the firing squad, the anthropic principle basically says, well, if the marksman hadn't missed, I wouldn't be here to wonder about why I'm still alive.
Yeah.
The fact that I am observing my survival means my survival was the only possible observation I could make.
Which is logically technically true. But if 50 elite snipers shoot at me from 10 feet away and all of them miss, I don't just dust off my shirt and say, wow, lucky me. I guess that's just how the math worked out.
No, of course not.
My intuition, my rational mind screams, They missed on purpose. Someone paid them off. The commander gave a secret order. There's an inescapable feeling of intentionality. You assume a mind orchestrated the outcome.
But if modern science wants to avoid the conclusion that a divine mind stopped the bullets or calibrated the gravity dial, what's the secular alternative? How do you mathematically explain the sniper's missing without introducing a designer?
This brings us to the secular counterargument, the multiverse. This is the battle for simplicity. The leading secular answer to the fine-tuning problem is that our universe isn't the only one.
The multiverse is essentially the infinite lottery solution. The theory posits that our universe is just one tiny bubble in a cosmic infinite bath of universe bubbles.
Okay.
And the idea is that in each separate bubble universe, the fundamental dials of physics are spun completely randomly.
So in universe bubble A, gravity is too heavy. It collapses. In universe bubble B, gravity is too light. It's a sterile void.
Yes. The vast, overwhelming majority of these universes are dead, dark, and entirely hostile to biology. But if you have an infinite number of bubbles popping into existence, eventually, purely by the laws of mathematical probability, one of them is going to randomly roll the exact Goldilocks settings required for carbon-based life.
And because we are carbon-based life forms capable of asking the question, we must, by definition, be living in the one winning lottery ticket universe. We can't observe the trillions of dead ones.
It's an elegant mathematical workaround. But Thornberry critiques this severely in the transcripts. He argues that the multiverse theory doesn't actually solve the ontological question of why is there something rather than nothing. It merely kicks the can down an infinitely long cosmic road.
Because if you have a mechanism or a set of quantum laws that is capable of generating infinite universes, you still have to ask the theater question, who built the universe-generating machine?
Right. Who established the quantum laws governing that possibility space? You've explained the infinite bubbles, but you haven't explained the bathtub or the water or the soap. You've taken the problem of existence and simply made it infinitely larger.
Which is why the theologian Richard Swinburne steps into the center of this debate. Swinburne argues that, contrary to popular belief, God is actually a much simpler scientific and philosophical hypothesis than the multiverse.
Yeah, that's his core thesis.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here. I really struggle with this claim. If I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, how on earth can a divine being be considered a simpler hypothesis? If God is an entity who can listen to billions of human prayers simultaneously and invent quantum mechanics and engineer the biochemistry of a leaf insect, that sounds infinitely complex.
Sure.
Dawkins famously mocks this idea. He calls God the ultimate Boeing 747 assembled by a tornado in a junkyard. Dawkins argues you cannot explain a complex universe by inventing an even more complex invisible wizard to build it.
That is the absolute crux of Dawkins' philosophical objection. And it hinges entirely on how we define the word simple. Dawkins defines simple as being made of small, physical, unintelligent parts. A single Lego brick is simple. A massive Lego castle is complex. Therefore, a brain is complex, and a God who is a mind would be supremely complex.
So how is Swinburne defining simple?
Swinburne is operating in the realm of metaphysical simplicity, specifically relying on Occam's razor. The principle of Occam's razor states that you should not multiply entities beyond necessity. When looking for an explanation, the one that requires the fewest assumptions is usually correct.
So the multiverse asks us to assume the existence of trillions upon trillions of invisible, unobservable universes, plus a machine to make them.
Right.
Theism asks us to assume the existence of one single entity.
But Swinburne goes deeper to answer Dawkins' objection about the complexity of God's power. He introduces what he calls the zero argument. This is a crucial piece of ELI 5 explained like I'm 5 philosophy.
Okay, hit me with it.
Swinburne asks us to imagine the limits of a being's power. What is the mathematically simplest possible limit to put on a force or a being? Let's say we imagine a being with a medium amount of power. Let's arbitrarily call it 50 units of power.
Okay, a being with 50 units of power. But the problem is, if the being has exactly 50 units, my brain immediately asks, why 50? Why not 49? Why not 51.3?
Exactly the point. Any highly specific finite limitation requires a limiting cause. You need an external explanation for why the dial is calibrated to exactly 50. What is holding it back from being 51? That requires a complex set of rules.
But infinite power.
Infinite power means zero limits. The limit is zero. Conceptually and mathematically, infinity requires no specific calibration. It doesn't require an external rulebook to enforce a boundary, because there is no boundary.
That makes a lot of sense.
Therefore, in metaphysics, an infinitely powerful, limitless mind is actually a simpler starting point than a highly specific finite universe with dials tuned to arbitrary numbers like 1.00000000000000004.
That is fascinating. The absence of limits is mathematically simpler than an arbitrary boundary. And Thornberry bolsters this with his concept of unified intent. He uses the choir conductor analogy.
Consider the uniformity of the universe. If you walk into a massive auditorium and you hear 50 different people singing the exact same note, perfectly in pitch, at the exact same time, you do not assume you're witnessing 50 isolated, random coincidences.
Right. You assume there is a single conductor at the front of the room, a unifying intent.
When physicists look at the universe, they see that every single electron in the cosmos has the exact same charge and mass. The laws of physics are uniform across billions of light years of space. For Thornberry, that staggering uniformity implies a single, simple, sustaining intent.
Now, I want to shift gears for a second because our sources don't just leave us with this strict Western binary. It's not just an atheistic machine versus a divine celestial architect. We also have this incredibly beautiful perspective from the ancient Eastern manuscripts in our stack, specifically the Rig Veda and the Vedanta tradition.
It's a vital inclusion because it completely shifts the metaphorical landscape of how we understand ultimate reality.
In the Western debate, God is almost always viewed as a carpenter, an architect building a house. He's outside the creation, hammering the boards together, tweaking the dials on the machine.
The Eastern perspective, however, views ultimate reality not as a king building an external kingdom, but as a seed. Think of an acorn. When an acorn grows, it isn't a carpenter building an oak tree from the outside.
Yeah.
The acorn possesses the pattern of the oak tree within itself, and it unfolds into the tree.
The text describes the universe as a divine exhalation. Existence is just what reality breathes out. It's this organic, top-down view where consciousness and matter aren't two separate things hammered together. They're just branches growing from the exact same root.
It fundamentally changes the relationship between the creator and the created. It's a vision of profound interconnectedness.
It's stunningly poetic, but I have to be honest, as I was reading through these cosmic debates, exhalations, multiverses, infinite limits, I had this really stark, grounding realization. We can sit in a studio and debate Trinitarian metaphysics and quantum bubbles all day.
Sure.
But when you're sitting in a pitch-black hotel room at 3 a.m., in a city you don't know, panicking about your job security, your identity, and whether your life actually matters, these high-level cosmic ideas do not offer much immediate comfort.
You're identifying the disconnect between abstract ontology and the lived human experience.
Absolutely.
And our sources do not ignore this. In fact, they diagnose this exact modern crisis.
The sources describe our current cultural moment as living in a heavy fog of relativism. They talk specifically about the modern professional experience, which is utterly dominated by burnout and what they call a performative identity.
If you remove the top-down framework, if there's no objective, transcendent anchor for who you are, then your identity isn't given to you. It must be constructed by you.
Which sounds liberating at first, like I can be whoever I want to be. But the text points out the crushing weight of that freedom. If you have to wake up every single morning and invent your own meaning, you have to constantly perform your identity for the world. You're only as valuable as your last achievement, your last social media post, your last performance review.
It generates a pervasive anxiety.
Right.
It's the terror of being entirely self-made. Because if you build your own reality from scratch, you live in constant fear that you'll accidentally demolish it. You are the only load-bearing pillar in your life.
So in this debate over secular humanism, I want to push back on behalf of the secular listener. Do I really need high-level metaphysics to just be a good person and find peace? Can't I just rely on biological instinct? The Greeks had a word for it. Storge, natural affection.
Right.
Isn't the evolutionary instinct to love my kids, to care for my local community, and to cooperate for survival enough to sustain human ethics? Why do I need a transcendent reality?
The theological counterargument presented in our sources is incredibly sharp on this point. It accuses secular humanism of committing what it calls spiritual fruit theft.
Spiritual fruit theft. Okay, let's unpack that.
Secularism, according to the text, wants to harvest the fruit of the Christian ontological tree. It wants the life things like universal human rights, human flourishing, and charity. And it wants the love sentimentality, natural affection, community support.
Sure, all the good stuff.
but it wants to completely sever those beautiful fruits from the light, the transcendent, objective moral order that originally defined and grounded them.
It's like you want to keep eating the apples, but you chop down the orchard to make room for a parking lot, and you assume the apples will just keep magically appearing in your fridge.
The text argues that without the light of an objective truth to guide it, love rapidly degrades. It doesn't stay pure. It rots into one of two things. First, it can degrade into pure indulgence.
Meaning love just becomes affirming whatever someone wants to do.
Yes. If there's no higher standard of what is actually good for a human soul, then love just becomes cheering someone on, even if they're engaging in behavior that destroys them. You have no objective ground to say, no, this is bad for you, so love becomes mere permission.
Or, the text says, biological storage degrades into dangerous tribalism. And this one felt very relevant.
Because biological natural affection is, by definition, a closed circle. It evolved for the survival of the immediate kin group. I love my child deeply, but without a transcendent moral light, I might love my child so much that I will act horrifically unjustly toward your child in order to secure resources for mine.
I love my tribe so much that I can justify absolute violence against the outsider. Natural affection without a transcendent light to structure it isn't universally benevolent. It's completely unstable.
But if you're a secular humanist, your counterargument would be that human reason is sufficient. My own rational mind can figure out the right moral path without needing a cosmic lawgiver.
And this is where the sources introduce the epistemic loop. The theological argument suggests that human perception itself is a bent ruler. If human autonomy and self-centeredness have warped our moral vision, then we're using a broken instrument to try and measure reality.
Think about the implications of that. If you're trying to draw a straight line, but the ruler you're using is curved, every line you draw will be curved, no matter how carefully you trace it. If our reasoning is bent by our desire to be our own gods, we are trapped in an epistemic loop.
So what does this all mean for us functionally?
It means that if we try to generate our own light using a bent ruler, we end up with what the text calls misordered clarity. We look at the world, we feel absolutely certain that we see perfectly, but we're looking in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And this leads to frantic behavior. We try to maintain absolute narrative control over history and politics because we believe we are the only ones steering the ship.
If God isn't in control of the universe, then I have to be in control. I have to manage everyone's perception of me. I have to fix all of society's problems on my own timeline. And that leads directly back to that crushing anxiety and burnout in the pitch-black hotel room.
We collapse under the weight of trying to be sovereign.
So if we're trapped in an epistemic loop, and we literally cannot generate the light ourselves without burning out or falling into tribalism, where does the light come from? What is the straight edge we can measure our lives against?
This brings us to the core of the theological treatise, the architecture of reality, the assertion of the Triune God of love, life, and light.
Now, I joked earlier when I first read this that love, life, and light sounds like a live, laugh, love throw pillow you'd buy at a suburban craft store. It sounds fluffy.
It does a bit.
But the sources are making a massive, concrete, ontological claim here. They are claiming that these three concepts are the irreducible, foundational, structural beams of the entire universe. They answer the three primitive, driving questions of humanity.
Let's map these out according to the text, because they correspond to very specific philosophical categories. First, life. This corresponds to the category of being. It answers the ultimate question we started the show with. Why is there something rather than nothing?
Right.
The theological answer is that the source of reality doesn't just have life. He possesses life in himself. He is uncreated existence.
Second is light. This corresponds to intelligibility. It answers the questions that make science possible. Why does math work? Why is the universe predictable? Why is there objective truth and an ordered reality instead of random chaos?
And third is love. This corresponds to relational perfection. It answers the distinctly human, deeply emotional question. Why do we care about good and evil? Why do we have an inescapable moral conscience and a desperate desire for connection and intimacy?
To understand how fundamental these three beams are, I find it really helpful to explore a thought experiment from the text. What happens if you remove just one color from this reality triad? Imagine a universe that has life so matter exists, and light so there are strict mathematical laws governing that matter, but you subtract love entirely.
If you subtract love, you're left with a cold, mechanical, purpose-free machine. It's a clockwork universe of atoms colliding with zero moral meaning, no compassion, and no ultimate purpose. It works, but it doesn't care.
Now imagine a universe with life existence and love, passion, deep emotion, relational desire, but you subtract light, truth, order, logic, structure.
Then you have a chaotic fever dream. You have intense burning emotions in existence, but absolutely no truth, no direction, no rules, and no way to make sense of anything. It would be pure madness.
These three have to exist together to create the reality we experience. But this raises a huge theological problem. Earlier, we talked about Swinburne's concept of divine simplicity, that God isn't made of complex parts. How can God be three distinct things, love, life, and light, but still be completely simple and limitless?
To resolve this, the text relies on the prism analogy. Imagine God's infinite essence is like a single, indivisible beam of pure white light. It is one perfect, simple, unified reality. But our finite, limited human minds cannot comprehend infinite perfection directly. We are the glass prism.
So when that unified white beam of God's essence hits the limitation of the human mind, it refracts. It splits into colors we can process.
Yes, the complexity is in our perception, not in his nature. When we experience God's sustaining creative power, our minds perceive it and label it as life.
I see.
When we experience his truth, his holiness, and the mathematical order of the cosmos, we perceive it as light. When we experience his relational goodness and mercy, we perceive it as love. But in God, his love is his light, which is his life. They're one simple reality.
Which leads to what might be the most profound realization in the entire stack of sources. The nature of God before the universe was even created. The concept of the social God.
The doctrine of the Trinity, the idea of one God in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is often viewed as a confusing math problem. But philosophically, it solves a massive dilemma regarding the nature of love. If God were just a single solitary monad before he created the universe, who was he loving?
Right. If his very essence is love, but he's the only thing that exists, he would just be alone in the dark, a subject with no object. If his nature is love, but he has no one to love, he is incomplete. He would be fundamentally lonely.
Which leads to a very troubling theological conclusion. It would mean that a solitary God created the universe out of need. He created human beings because he was lonely and needed someone to love him back to fulfill his own nature.
He needed us to be his emotional support animals. He created us to fix a deficit in his own psychology.
Which is an incredibly weak view of a supreme being. But the Trinitarian view argues that God is an eternal event of love. The Father has been eternally loving the Son and the fellowship of the Spirit since before time began. God was already a perfect, complete society of joy. He lacked absolutely nothing.
So creation wasn't a desperate plea for company. Creation was the overflow of a banquet. There was so much joy, so much perfect relational love within the Trinity that it simply spilled over into creating a universe to share it.
It changes everything about human value. If God created you because he was lonely, you are a tool. But if God created you out of overflow, you aren't here to fill a void in God. You're here to be a guest at the banquet. You're invited to participate in the overflow.
Okay, I love the banquet analogy, but I have to bring this conversation to a screeching halt because we're sitting here talking about a perfect, beautiful architecture of pure love, life, and light. We're talking about a banquet of joy. But reality demands we look out the window. If the universe is built on a foundation of perfect love, why is the world so incredibly full of darkness and suffering and agonizing pain?
We have arrived at the problem of evil. And philosophically, it's the absolute strongest argument against this entire top-down framework.
We have to bring Dawkins back into the room here because he wields this argument like a sledgehammer in the panel debate. He brings up the parasitoid wasp.
The Igdaman wasp. It is a biological reality that is very difficult to reconcile with a loving creator. The wasp lays its eggs inside the body of a living caterpillar. When the wasp larvae hatch, they slowly eat the caterpillar from the inside out.
It's awful.
And they are biologically programmed to eat the non-essential organs first, carefully keeping the host alive as long as possible so the meat stays fresh.
It's literal nightmare fuel. It is a horror movie happening in the dirt. And I have to ask bluntly, on behalf of the listener, how does a top-down framework explain this? How does a God of pure love orchestrate a biological horror show like a parasitoid wasp, or childhood leukemia, or a tsunami that wipes out a village?
To impartially convey how the theologians in our sources respond to this, we first look at Richard Swinburne's soul-making defense. Swinburne argues that we fundamentally misunderstand the purpose of the physical world. The world is not designed to be a hedonistic paradise.
Okay.
It's not a divine nursery where we're padded with bubble wrap and kept perfectly comfortable.
So if it's not a nursery, what is it?
It's an environment intentionally designed with sharp edges. Physics, natural disasters, biological frailties, disease, these things provide immense friction. Swinburne argues that without friction, without the genuine possibility of real pain, danger, and loss, human beings could never develop higher moral virtues. You cannot develop genuine courage if there is nothing to fear. You cannot develop deep compassion if no one is ever hurting. You cannot display sacrificial love if nothing ever costs you anything.
I see the logic. Without friction, you don't get saints. You get pampered, self-absorbed robots.
That is his defense for natural evil, why the system has sharp edges. But Thornberry introduces a much deeper metaphysical concept to deal with the nature of evil itself. This is the theory of privation.
This part of the text was abstract, but I think it's the most crucial concept to grasp. Thornberry argues that evil is not a thing. It's not an element on the periodic table. God didn't invent a substance called evil and pour it into the universe. Evil is a parasite.
Yes, evil has no ontological substance of its own. It does not exist independently.
I loved the analogies the author used to explain this. It's the hole in the sock. The hole in your sock isn't made out of a dark, evil material called hole. The hole is simply the absence of wool where wool is supposed to be.
That's a great way to put it.
Or think of rust on a car. Rust isn't a new metal that the factory installed. It is the corruption and degradation of the good steel. Or a cavity in your tooth. It's the lack of healthy enamel.
Which leads to a profound philosophical extrapolation. If evil is merely a privation, a lack of the good that ought to be there, then evil has absolutely no creative power. Evil has never created a single thing in the history of the universe. It can only vandalize what God has already created.
It's just a parasite feeding on the good creation. It's the shadow where the light is blocked.
And this framework answers what the sources call the dangerous deduction. Many people look at the world and deduce that God actually needs evil in order to show off his glory. They assume he needs sinners so he can look merciful, or he needs suffering so he can look heroic.
The analogy that came to mind was a corrupt firefighter. A firefighter who secretly starts a fire in a building just so he can run in, save the family, and get his picture on the front page of the newspaper.
Exactly. The privation theory protects the character of God from that accusation. God is eternally perfect, brave, and loving in his own nature within the Trinity. Think of a deeply courageous man sitting quietly in his living room reading a book.
Okay.
He is still intrinsically brave, even if nothing dangerous is happening around him. His character is full. He doesn't need his neighbor's house to catch on fire in order to be brave.
But the burning building, the historical theater of our fallen, broken world, is what permits us to witness the bravery that was already there.
Precisely. Evil is a permitted vandalism. It provides the dark backdrop for the display of an eternal love that did not require the evil to exist, but absorbs it and uses it to reveal the ultimate depth of that love.
So if we have this perfect, simple God who is watching his good creation get vandalized by this parasite of privation, how does he actually step into the burning building to fix it? This brings us to a major transition in the text. We move from ontology, the study of who God is in his essence, to what the text calls economy.
The economic trinity. In theology, the word economy doesn't mean money. It comes from the Greek word for household management. It refers to how the Trinity operates in human history to orchestrate the rescue of the vandalized creation.
Right.
The sources present a very specific, unbreakable formula for every divine action, from the Father, through the Son, by the Spirit.
And the text uses a brilliant symphony analogy to ELI 5, this concept.
Imagine the rescue of humanity as the performance of a masterpiece symphony. The Father is the composer. He purposes and plans the rescue from eternity past. The sheet music, the grand design, exists perfectly in his mind.
The Son is the virtuoso performer on the stage. He is the one who steps out of eternity and into the timeline of history. He takes on human flesh, and he actually plays the notes.
Beautifully put.
He lives out the perfect act of obedience that humanity failed to live and absorbs the cost of the vandalism on the cross. He executes the music flawlessly.
But here's the problem. If you're sitting in the audience and you're completely deaf, it does not matter how flawless the virtuoso's performance is on stage. The music cannot save you if you cannot hear it.
Wow, yeah.
So the Holy Spirit acts as the acoustic resonance. The Spirit is the divine agent who opens the deaf ears, brings the music into the listener's soul, and makes the objective performance on the stage a subjective saving reality for you.
But I have to push back here on the mechanics of this acoustic resonance, based on something very jarring in the text. The sources use this incredibly blunt corpse analogy. They explicitly state that before the spirit acts, a human being isn't just spiritually hard of hearing, they're spiritually dead, a corpse in a graveyard.
Yes, the theological claim is that humanity is not just sick and in need of medicine, humanity is dead and in need of resurrection.
So if I'm a literal spiritual corpse, how can I possibly obey the biblical commands to flee to Christ, or choose life, or believe? If you stand in a cemetery and scream at a corpse to read a self-help book, you're crazy. A corpse cannot choose to wake up. I'm struggling to see how human free will operates if we are dead.
This is where we hit some heavy theological jargon that we need to unpack. The concepts are monergism and secondary causality. Monergism simply means one working. It means God does the waking up entirely on his own. The corpse provides zero assistance in its own resurrection.
But the command is still there in the text. God commands the dead person to live. How is that fair?
Secondary causality explains how this works. The idea is that the divine command itself carries the creative power to fulfill what it demands. Think of how light works. When a doctor shines a light into an unconscious person's eye, the eye doesn't choose to react. The light itself triggers the pupil to contract.
Oh, the power is in the light, not the eye.
Exactly. When the spirit says live to the corpse, the voice itself creates the life it demands. When the command says run, the voice creates the feet to run. The ability to obey the command is entirely gifted to the person hidden within the command itself.
I paused when I read this because I realized how incredibly freeing this concept is for the modern burnout professional sitting in that dark hotel room. We live in a world where you have to earn absolutely everything. You earn your salary, you earn your status, you earn your followers, but the source talks about election as affection.
God choosing to wake you up out of sheer unmerited love before you could do a single thing to earn it or prove your worth.
It means your core identity is received, not achieved. Think about how much anxiety that destroys. When you wake up on a Tuesday morning, your ultimate value in the cosmos is not on the line based on how many emails you answer or how well your presentation goes. You don't have to perform your identity to justify your existence.
Because your identity is firmly anchored in the Father's eternal purpose, accomplished by the Son's perfect record on the stage, and applied to you by the Spirit's resurrecting power. You are secure.
So, now that the corpse is awake, how does it actually walk? How do we take all this towering, abstract theology and apply it on a random Tuesday morning at the office? The text gives us some very practical frameworks for this.
Yes, the practical application of how to live as a participatory being in this top-down reality.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The sources discuss the concept of the moral law, the rules, the commandments, the thou shalts, and they compare the law to a mirror.
Relying on the revealing, eliminating nature of light.
Right. If I've been working in a coal mine all day and my face is covered in black dust and I walk into the bathroom and look in the mirror shows me exactly how dirty I am. It reveals the grime with perfect clarity. But I don't rip the mirror off the bathroom wall and try to scrub my face with the glass.
That would be absurd and physically painful.
And the text says that is exactly what legalism is. Legalism is trying to use the rules to clean yourself. It's trying to scrub your soul with the commandments. But the mirror has no power to clean you. The mirror's only job is to show you the dirt so clearly that it drives you out of the bathroom into the fountain to get washed.
The law diagnoses the profound need. Christ provides the actual cure.
So once you are washed, how do you walk in love, life, and light? Let's break them down practically. First, walking in love. The text says this means seeing your incredibly annoying coworkers not as obstacles, but as image bearers of God. Their value is bestowed on them from the top down, not earned by their daily behavior.
And practically, in a fractured world, walking in love manifests primarily as forgiveness. The source uses a striking phrase. It calls forgiveness the aroma of the cross.
Which means absorbing the cost. Human justice, bottom-up justice, demands that if you hurt me, I extract payment from you. If you embarrass me in a meeting, I gossip about you to ruin your reputation, or I give you the cold shoulder, I make you pay. But divine love means I cancel the debt. I take the hit. Just like Christ absorbed the hit of human rebellion on the cross, I absorb the cost of your offense without retaliating.
Second, walking in life. This relies on the ancient organic metaphor of the branch and the vine. A branch on a grapevine doesn't strain and grunt and hyperventilate to produce a grape. It produces fruit simply by abiding, by staying connected to the life-giving sap of the vine.
And the text notes something here that gave me a huge physical sigh of relief. It says, dead things don't struggle.
Yeah.
If you are a listener who feels this massive, exhausting internal battle against your own flaws, your temper, your selfishness, that struggle isn't proof that you are failing, it's proof that you are alive. You are swimming against the current of your own brokenness. Only dead fish just float easily downstream.
That internal friction is the evidence of the Spirit's life within you. And finally, walking in light. In a practical sense, this means radical transparency.
In a corporate world where everyone is hiding their mistakes, passing the blame, and aggressively curating their image, walking in the light means you stop hiding in the shadows.
Because you understand the difference between exposure for shame and exposure for healing. The enemy exposes your flaws to mock you and destroy you, but God exposes your flaws like a surgeon's light, to clearly see the wound so he can clean it and heal it. You can be radically honest about your failures because your core identity is perfectly secure.
But speaking of exposure and God's light, I have to ask a hard question about the end times, the eschatology mentioned at the end of the text. What about the concept of God's wrath? If God is simple, pure love and light, how does anger or wrath fit into his nature? Does he just lose his temper?
The source explains this beautifully, and it completely reframes the concept using the sun metaphor. The underlying theological premise here is that God is impassible. That means he does not have mood swings. He is not emotionally manipulated by us. He doesn't wake up angry on Tuesday and loving on Wednesday. His character is a constant, burning, unchanging reality, exactly like the sun in our sky.
Okay, the sun is constant, it just burns.
Now, imagine a living, healthy plant planted in the soil. To that living plant, the constant blazing rays of the sun bring growth, warmth, photosynthesis, and life. But now imagine a piece of rotting meat left on the sidewalk. To that dead meat, those exact same, unchanging rays of the sun bring desiccation, rapid decay, and destruction.
Wow. That's a huge paradigm shift.
The sun did not change its attitude. The sun didn't decide to be angry at the meat and loving to the plant. The difference is entirely in the ontological state of the object receiving the light. God's wrath is simply his holy, unchanging light, experienced by a soul that violently insists on remaining in the dark and the rot.
It is the exact same presence, the exact same love, just experienced as agony from a posture of absolute rebellion.
Which is why the main analysis of the treatise concludes with an urgent call. The sources describe the modern age, our fog of relativism and burnout, as Babylon, a place of deep confusion and exile. And the call for the listener is to be a lampstand. You're not the fire itself. You don't have to generate the truth. You are simply holding a borrowed flame, shining the light, life, and love of the Trinity into the modern fog so others can find their way home.
And as we wrap up this massive deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final mind-bending thought to mull over today. It brings us all the way back full circle to our debate with Richard Dawkins and the bottom-up view. Jamie Thornberry calls it the trust problem. It is the evolutionary argument against naturalism.
It's a profound, almost inescapable philosophical trap for the strict materialist.
Think about this very carefully. If Dawkins is right, and your brain is purely a biological survival engine, built completely blindly over millions of years by natural selection, its only job is to help you run away from tigers, find berries, and pass on your genes. If that is true, why should you trust that brain when it tries to do quantum physics or philosophy, or when it tries to write a book disproving God?
Because evolution selects exclusively for survival utility, not for objective truth.
Exactly. A false belief can keep you alive just as well as the truth. If the wind rustles the bushes and your primitive brain falsely believes the wind is a forest demon, so you run away in terror, you survive. You didn't get eaten by the tiger that might have been in the bushes.
Yeah.
The false belief kept you alive. Your brain doesn't need to know the atmospheric truth about wind currents. It just needs you to run.
So if the human mind is fundamentally calibrated for survival illusions, how can we have any confidence in our high-level reasoning?
Yeah.
How do we know all of our science and philosophy isn't just a complex survival illusion?
We couldn't. But the fact that the universe actually is intelligible, the fact that mathematics works across billions of light years, the fact that you, listening right now in your car or at your desk, have the capacity to ponder the Trinity, fine-tuning, and the deep architecture of the cosmos, suggests a profound correspondence between your mind and the deep structure of the universe.
It suggests the universe was built to be known, by minds explicitly built to know it.
Exactly. Maybe we aren't accidental mold growing on a random rock in a cold machine. Maybe figuring it out is the whole point. Jonathan Edwards, one of the heavyweight theologians in our stack, famously said that we hang by a slender thread over the void. And we do. Existence is terrifyingly fragile.
It is.
But after reading these sources, I realized that thread isn't a fragile, terrifying spider web ready to snap at any moment. It is an umbilical cord. It connects us directly to the source of reality itself.
The eternal wellspring of love, life, and light.
So next time you wake up in that pitch-black hotel room of cultural confusion, or you feel the primal astonishment of existence sitting in traffic, don't panic. You don't have to generate your own light. The stage is already built. You just have to step out of the fog and walk in the light that is already shining. Keep wondering, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.